everyone, my name is Raquel with Redmond Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Ransomware vs. Active Directory Backups, What Can Throw a Wrench into Your Disaster Recovery Process, sponsored by Semperis. Semperis is a pioneer of identity-driven cyber resilience for cross-cloud and hybrid environments. The company provides cyber preparedness, incident response, and disaster recovery solutions for enterprise directory services, the keys to the kingdom. Its patented technology for Microsoft Active Directory protects over 40 million identities from cyber attacks, data breaches, and operational errors. Semperis is headquartered in New York City and operate internationally, with our research and development team distributed between San Francisco and Tel Aviv. I'd like to start off with just a couple of housekeeping details. We will be hosting a live Q&A towards the end of today's presentation, so please type any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. Semperis has also provided a number of great resources, so please take a moment to check those out. And finally, this webcast is being recorded, so please check your email for a link to the replay so you can share it with a colleague or rewatch it yourself. Now on to the speakers for today. We will be hearing from Clark Brown, partner and practice leader at Alescent, and Sean Deuby, 15-time Microsoft MVP and director of services at Semperis. So welcome you both, and I look forward to the presentations. Sean, please take it away.
Thanks, Raquel. Hopefully everybody can hear me just fine. I'll step forward here in half a second. So thanks for everybody taking the time off to attend today. As you can see, the title of this session is called Ransomware vs. Active Directory Backups, What Can Throw a Wrench into Your DR Process. And I apologize for a little bit of the cliche, but this is a very important topic, and the fact that you're attending shows that you have interest in it as well. The session explores what our 80 traditional disaster recovery plans have prepared us for, and how they really are not adequate to the modern cyber disaster threats that we face. Hopefully, coming out of this, you'll have some insights and some actions to cope with this new reality that you have to plan for. My background, I like to say that I've been doing Microsoft Identity as long as Microsoft has been doing identity. So I rolled out NT 3.5 and 3.5.1 around the world for TI, and then I was one of Intel's original Active Directory architects and helped lead the team for 10 years. I've done a bunch of stuff since then, doing consulting, et cetera, but I'll spare you the eye card here. Clark?
Yes, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that, and thank you for having me along for the ride today. Quite simply, I've worked in primarily aerospace and defense most of my life. An Active Directory and the security thereof is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's one of those things as a CISO and a CTO, quite frankly, and running operations, IT operations, that I've had a lot of experience in coming back from things that have gone wrong. So I'm very excited to be part of this today, and hopefully we can shed some light on what we can do better as an industry.
Thanks. So as a way of introduction, for those of you in the audience that are risk professionals or security professionals, you're probably well familiar with this. Maybe some folks are not as familiar with this. This is a classic risk matrix in which you're presented, you have a laundry list of things that could go wrong, of what threats are to your environment, regardless of what the environment is. And of course, you only have a certain amount of money available and a certain amount of resources available to mitigate the risks, to mitigate the threats. So you put together a chart to order what's most important to you. And as you can see, the x-axis is what is the impact of a particular threat, and the y-axis is what is the probability of it happening. So this is an example one for a data center. And you can see in the lower left, you've got the green stuff. So you have unauthorized physical access. Not very likely nowadays given the physical systems that are in place. And if one person does get access, it's not necessarily the end of the world. On the other end of the scale, you have a power failure where the probability of it happening may not be super, super high anymore. It used to be pretty high, but the impact of it is pretty catastrophic to a data center, which is, of course, why you see outside every data center, you see a diesel generator, and actually a lot of office buildings today I've seen diesel generators. So this allows you to point out to the business what is the most important thing you should be spending money on. The problem is, in the last few years, what is most important or what is the biggest threat has changed. And I put this simply as denial of availability malware. So usually you hear ransomware being used, but actually denial of availability, or DOA, which is a lot easier to say, is maybe a better way of describing it because it includes two categories. It includes ransomware, but it also includes wiperware. And you can think of wiperware as ransomware with no way out of it. So in the category of ransomware, we have something that's going on even as we speak. So the city of Torrance, which is a suburb of Los Angeles of 150,000 citizens, right now has a ransomware attack in place. And this is a particularly nasty strain of ransomware because before they encrypt all the data, they are alleged to have stolen 200 gigabytes, exfiltrated 200 gigabytes of data that they threaten to expose on the public internet if they don't pay the ransom. So right now, my understanding is about a week or so old, they're demanding $680,000 of ransom. I don't know where that stands right now, but it is very current and very active. The classic, best-known example of wiperware is, and many of you are probably familiar with, is Maersk. So Maersk, this is back in 2017, Maersk is the world's largest shipping company. About 1/5 of all worldwide shipping travels on Maersk transport. Now, many of you are probably familiar with this. Andy Greenberg wrote an article in Wired magazine. It's pretty widely read, but in my discussions with folks, I've been a little surprised at the number of people that really are not aware of this so much. So if you indulge me, and not that you have a lot of choice, I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail. Maersk has been very public about what happened to them. The CISO has presented on several occasions, and I'm going to share some information that you may find really relates to what we're talking about. And to me, just personally speaking, when something bad happens, I think it's human nature that you sort of have two reactions. Let's say an example of a friend of yours has a heart attack. The first is, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And then the second is, how far apart are the situation they're in from me? Oh, he didn't exercise, oh, he ate poorly, sort of makes you feel better. So in Maersk, this could happen to you. So the background of this is that the variant of the malware that they were hit with is called NotPetya, which is wiperware, which is designed to encrypt your data on the network, and there's no way to get it back. Russia, NotPetya is Russian malware. It's actually, I don't know what you want to call it, warware. As you're aware, Russia is conducting skirmishes with Ukraine. And this was a weapon that was used to further disrupt the daily life and operations in Ukraine. It was spread into Ukraine via Ukraine's version of what we would think of as TurboTax, their ubiquitous tax software. Russia infiltrated the tax software company and put the malware on as a payload in updates to the tax software downloads. So when every PC that had this tax software downloaded updates to it, they got the NotPetya payload. Maersk got infected as collateral to this. They have an office in Odessa, Ukraine, and one of the PCs has this attack software on it. NotPetya got downloaded onto this PC. Once it was on the PC, in 7 minutes, it encrypted 55,000 devices across Maersk's worldwide network. It brought 1,200 critical applications offline. People were literally running across rooms and unplugging things from the wall to try to recover things in time. As far as Active Directory goes, it encrypted 146 of 147 domain controllers across the company. The only domain controller that was left on board was one in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm sorry, it was actually in Ghana. Accounts differ on this. It was in Ghana, and the only reason it was kept on, the only reason it was not destroyed is because there was a power failure in the Ghana office. So they found that this one had not been destroyed. They had the system administrator gather the disks up from this one domain controller and get them to Lagos, Nigeria, where a sysadmin there put him in a backpack or a briefcase or something, and he got a free ride on Maersk Gulfstream G450, a corporate jet from Nigeria to Birmingham, holding basically the future. If you're an AD guy or an AD person, you recognize that this is like the future of a company on these disks, because if you lose all of Active Directory, it's practically impossible to get it back. So they got it back to England. They were able to build the seed forest for Active Directory out of those hard drives, but it still ended up taking them 9 days to get it put back together. The CIO slept at the office for 70 days, and ultimately it cost them estimated $350 million, and that's for Maersk alone. That doesn't have any description of the impact for all of their suppliers around the world that were completely hung. So, scary business, and it could happen to you.
If you don't mind, I think you make a great point there in that this isn't just about attacking a particular company. This also has to do with the supply chain. And this is something that we've seen in spades over the last couple months with what's going on in the world. So it's not just about disruption to a particular business. It's about disruption to its overall supply chain. So when you talk, you can be collateral, or you can be the primary target and still be attacked through a collateral agency.
Yes, and so the writer, Andy Greenberg, is the one that wrote the article on Maersk and also on Olympic Destroyer, which I'll talk about briefly in a few minutes. And he also wrote a book called Sandworm, and it goes into great detail over the Russian group that is executing these attacks, and in the description of what happened with Maersk. So, to what Clark is saying, you're focused on what's happening to your company. Well, outside the gates of your shipping yards, trucks are lined up for miles to try to get in, but they can't because with the computer down, they don't know where. They don't know what's on. They don't know what's on the ships. They don't know what's on the shipping containers, and they don't know what's on the trucks. So, based is relevant to what we're talking about right now. So, we have a quick poll question. So, to what extent would your company be impacted if a ransomware or wiper attack took out all of your domain controllers and AD was down? If you give us some quick input here, certainly, AD is very predominant in the industry right now. I spent 5 years working as an identity consultant, both for on-prem and in the Microsoft cloud. And I worked with some companies that used Active Directory not as its primary source, as a secondary source, but the vast majority I worked with use AD as their core identity system. A couple more seconds.
And further, too, I've always thought of Active Directory as the safe door, behind which you hide your company jewels, and printed on that safe door is a map leading the person who's interested at the location of every corporate jewel you have. So protecting your Active Directory infrastructure is extraordinarily important. It's the basis from which everything else derives the direction it needs to go. Very important.
Well, and that's a really good point, Clark, which is, yes, we think of Active Directory as just securing user IDs and passwords. But once you have domain dominance, you also know where the important applications are and how to get to them. And that's, frankly, a lot of this most effective malware, including NotPetya, leverage Active Directory to move around the network in a flash. So let's see what we have as far as polling results here. So 36% catastrophic impact, 36% severe impact, and 18% significant impact. So we're talking about 85% is significant to catastrophic impact. We conducted a survey also on this, and this pretty well maps what we've seen for other companies from this survey. We show about 90% would be significant, severe, or catastrophic in case something happened to Active Directory. When we talk about bad things happening, what's increasingly come up is the topic of cyber insurance. And certainly we've seen a lot more companies applying for cyber insurance. It's been a popular option insurance companies are noting. My take on it is that it's no substitute for preparedness. So for a number of reasons. So does the attack match your coverage? From an insurance company point of view, NotPetya was an act of war. The fact that Maersk was hit as collateral damage is another aspect to it. So even though this is not common, you would be naive to assume that there isn't a possibility of this sort of thing happening in the future, because we know everybody has this. Does the ransom match your policy limits? Typical policies, are in the tens to low hundreds of thousands of dollars, and lots of malware asks for a lot more than that, which means that your recovery is on hold until there's some negotiation between what the ransomware bad guys are asking for and what your insurance payout is. And, oh, by the way, you can't rebuild your systems yet until you come to some resolution on that. You can't tear down your systems if you're hoping to simply unlock them. It's been documented that half of ransomware victims suffer repeat attacks. I think this was out of FireEye. So, and further, that ransomware bad actors are attempting to search out to find who has cyber insurance, and that makes you more likely to be attacked. Some of the softer issues are around how does it look? How does it look to your customers that your infrastructure is not prepared enough to withstand or recover from a ransomware attack, that you have to have insurance? And by the same token, how does it look, for your competitors? And finally, and this is not a small thing, is it right? Is it right to perpetuate this economy by funding the ransomware ransoms?
That's a great point. And one of the things on that slide that I wanted to cover on real quick is we've seen in the last 5 years or so a significant increase in nation-state-sponsored attacks. So whereas it used to be just the largest companies in the world who are really the focus of these nation states, now it goes down into the supply chain, and we see even some of the smaller companies being targeted. And when that happens, it's considered an act of war, and your insurance wouldn't cover you. So just preparedness, as you said, Sean, is extraordinarily important.
Yeah, cyber insurance is fraught with, well, as in any insurance, is fraught with loopholes for insurance companies to avoid paying out. including I've seen some clauses about the relative preparedness of your infrastructure, that they can get out of paying insurance out if your infrastructure is not adequately protected. So a new, what I would call a cyber-first risk matrix looks like this, essentially putting DOA malware as the top threat to be prepared for and that you need to be focusing on. This is probably not news to you, but this is the sort of thing that business professionals, if you're a technologist and you have to talk to the business, this is the sort of thing that the business appreciates. So when was the last time that you tested your disaster recovery process? Now, this is anonymous. There's no tracking back to who this is, so honesty is appreciated in here. It is difficult. Active Directory disaster recovery is difficult. It's not easy. There are many steps that have to be performed, and unless you're an AD person, it is really not appreciated how difficult it is to have a full forest recovery. When people talk about Active Directory recovery, they think about a domain controller going down, pretty much. The situation we're talking about here is all of your AD being encrypted, something that would require a full forest recovery. Now, I've documented the Microsoft steps for the process for this. There are 16 steps that you have to take, and many of these 16 steps have to be done with every domain controller that you have in your environment. So if you have 15 domain controllers, 20, 50 domain controllers, this can take a long time. And the thing that is also not appreciated when you're examining this is that not only does it take a long time, it takes time when the world is burning down around you and managers are running around with their hair on fire, and you have the CEO trying to call you on your cell phone asking when is it going to be up, and you can't get anything wrong. So let's see what people have to say here. So I think this is interesting for everybody involved. So there are some people that have done testing within the last 6 to 12 months, within the last year. Probably that's about 25, 28%, and then another 14% within the last couple of years. But the majority have significantly have either a plan created but never tested, or no plan created. I can speak to the plan created but never tested. This means you've looked at the Microsoft documentation and you read through it and it makes sense, and maybe you copied it locally, and if you're really diligent, you've taken that and you've really thought about it and you built a plan based on it that's sort of customized to your environment. But you've never tested it because it's so difficult to do such a test. In our polls, let's see what our poll has to say here. No, I think, well, I'm just going to move on. So what this shows is a gap between what the threat is and what the preparedness for it is. A little research shows that organizations are definitely in denial. It's not just you. It's much broader than that. So in 2019, the ransomware types of the different variants have doubled. And this now includes Linux as well. So if you have Linux, you're no longer safe from ransomware. And they've grown more sophisticated. So for example, if you go back and look at torrents, this is ransomware where not only do they encrypt your data, before they encrypt it, they exfiltrate some of it, and they threaten to expose it if you don't pay the ransom. Pretty clever. 118% increase in attacks in 2019, and in 2020, big surprise, hospital attacks are increasing. And in March, 148% increase in attacks in March alone because, of course, the bad guys are taking advantage of the COVID situation. You probably saw something that said that there was some group of bad actors said that they would lay off during this crisis, but of course there's no bad actors union that says everybody agrees, so everybody else is taking advantage of it. Now, at the same time, the poll says that 77% of organizations are confident or very confident about recovering from an attack. But here's the gap. Only 21% have contingency plans. So that's 55% of organizations are confident about recovering from an attack that don't have contingency plans. And only 11% believe that they can recover in 3 days. So this is human nature. There is some parallels to what's going on with this crisis in our world right now, is that people believe they've got things covered when really they don't. Put yourself in the position of Maersk. How would you recover from having all of your devices encrypted in minutes? I wrote a blog post a long time ago about disaster recovery called "Thinking the Unthinkable." So, stolen from an article about nuclear war, but there's definitely some parallels in that.
Yeah, Sean,
so
just real quick, if I could.
Sure.
The graphic that you had on the previous slide is so appropriate for those business leaders who are on the call. One little piece of guidance that I would give to close the gap between the 77% who say they're confident or very confident about recovering, but they only have 21% of those have contingency plans. For those who are leading their business, those business leaders on the call, I would say do not see this activity as an IT activity, but as business activity, because the impacts are so great for the business overall and drive the development of the contingency plan and the regular testing of the recovery itself. So I would view this as, just like any disaster recovery plan, as a business effort.
And that's where a risk matrix to help make decisions and prioritize resources comes in. So let's take all of this and tie this back into Active Directory. I think everybody here knows AD for most hybrid identity environments. So defining a hybrid identity as an on-premises identity system that is projected up into the cloud, whether it's Azure Active Directory or Amazon Web Services or anything else that Okta, whatever you have, that's a hybrid identity environment. Active Directory is pretty much the core for this for most companies. In our poll, we found that the majority of companies that were polled, 60% of them found that Active Directory or described AD in their environment as critical to their business environment, and 81% overall listed AD as important or critical, and those numbers have been higher in some other places as well. At the same time, AD is highly vulnerable to DOA malware, and indeed, it is a key enabler for DOA malware to spread throughout a corporate network. Already talked about Maersk. What is not as well known is there was another one that occurred during the opening ceremonies of the 2018 Winter Olympics. And again, Andy Greenberg wrote about this in Wired. He christened it Olympic Destroyer. It knocked out all of the domain controllers for the Korean IT Olympics during the opening ceremonies. Fortunately, they had put together a very solid disaster recovery plan and were able to trigger it and bring it back up so that almost nobody recognized that there was a problem as everybody was buying tickets and getting, e-tickets and all that to go to the sporting events. They were able to get it back up with having minimal effect. I've talked already about how difficult AD is to recover in a disaster scenario and the amount of time that it takes, literally days, while the company is at a complete standstill. And because That's why it's called, because it's critical to so many systems, that's why applications are called being AD integrated. If you're AD integrated and there's no AD, there's no application until AD has been restored first.
Yeah, and it's important to note as well that the attacks that we're looking at are becoming much more sophisticated in that they will install them weeks at a time, and they do this to ensure that they're backed up if you back up your AD environment, so that if you reconstitute from a backup, you're just putting that virus or that malware back on your AD system, so you've really made no gain.
The statistic that I'm aware of, and this is probably different for malware because for ransomware because it attacks very quickly, but for overall, the average time that a piece of malware sits in a system, or that if a hacker has penetrated your system, that they're resident on, is a little bit less than 200 days. So that's a lot of time to install backdoors and other malware.
Great point.
So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about how this relates and how Semperis, the company, and our solutions relates to the situation that we describe. Semperis is an enterprise identity protection and cyber resilience company. Well, those are general words, but let's bring more specifics. So we focus on threat mitigation and rapid recovery in the cyber world from cyber attacks and other types of cyber malfeasance, I'll describe it as. The name comes from the Greek semper paratus, always ready. And on our team, we have a lot of Microsoft experience. Myself and several other team members are longtime MVPs with a lot of experience in Microsoft identity, including our CTO, who was involved in the Microsoft Active Directory recovery team for a number of years. To that, we have two solutions for this area. The first is called AD Forced Recovery, pretty self-explanatory. ADFR is a fully automated disaster recovery orchestration for AD. And the other is called Semperis DS Protector, Directory Service Protector, which is a real-time AD object and attribute tracking utility, auditing, and real-time rollback utility for any changes made to AD. So ADFR, as I said, is fully automated, and it features three major recovery modes. The first is a single DC restore. In other words, a non-authoritative DC restore, something causes the DC to fall over and die, you can recover it. The second is a partition restore. So you can recover a domain partition, you can recover the configuration partition. If you're using AD integrated DNS, you can recover the DNS partition or applications. So imagine the scenario of a rogue script that goes through and makes massive changes throughout a domain. You can recover a domain without actually incurring downtime in the domain by simply automatically recovering one DC. And the full forest recovery. This is the full disaster hair on fire scenario. And this is designed to be as lightweight and require as few choices as possible. It is designed for the situation where, as I said, the phrase I like to use, everybody running around with their hair on fire. It allows you to restore hundreds of DCs in the time it takes to manually restore a single DC because it does all these operations in parallel. There is a management server that orchestrates the overall operation, and this is using the Microsoft disaster recovery process so that at the end of it, this is fully supported by Microsoft. And the individual agents on the domain controllers handle what happens in every domain controller. So we're installed from everything from small law offices, to Fortune 1 with hundreds and hundreds of domain controllers. And so as a result, you shorten the recovery process in a very difficult and error-prone recovery process, if you do it manually, from days to hours. So our average time is approximately 90% is what we've seen across the companies. It's specifically architected for this situation where it's a cyber attack or cyber problems. You can sort of look at disaster recovery in AD in two categories. There's something where you trust the operating system, and so you know the OS is okay. It's just a problem with AD, and you want to put it back on there. Or where you don't trust the operating system, which is the cyber instance that we're talking about. So ADFR is architected to not require any Active Directory at all. It doesn't require SMB. It uses its own certificates for communication. It runs in a work group, or it runs in a forest that's separate from the forest it's protecting. It can recover to any hardware or any IP address without dependency on the source. So if you look at system state restore or a bare metal recovery, that is dependent on the operating system and the hardware of what you're backing up. We back up only Active Directory. We back up the DIT, the logs, the registry hives, and sysfile. So not only does that mean that gives us flexibility in what we recover to. So for example, recovering to any IP gives us the ability to, in a disaster, you can spin up a bunch of VMs in your favorite cloud service, Azure or AWS, and point the recovery to the IP addresses of those new servers and quickly spin up a recovery Active Directory forest in the cloud. And because we only back up Active Directory, it's decoupled from the OS. That means that any malware that has been sitting on the OS that you don't know, may be there, may not be there, that would be there if you did a system state backup or a bare metal recovery, we don't have in our backups. It also makes the backups much, much smaller than they would be otherwise. This is a very simple picture of what the recovery console looks like. As I said, the whole design principle is to make it simple. So you can press on a big button that says domain controller restore, you can press on something that says partition recovery, or you can press on forest recovery. It takes a total of 6 clicks to get from this console to having the recovery started, and then after that it's hands off. Our other product is, you can think of as more of an operational product. It's called DS Protector, as I said. And what it does is it captures all changes that have been made to Active Directory. And when I say all changes, I mean all changes, because what it does is it monitors the Active Directory replication stream. So all the data, all the changes to AD that a domain controller gets, DS Protector gets, and collects it. And it also sees who made the changes by monitoring the security event log, 8 different events in the security event log. And then what it does is it correlates the changes that were made in Active Directory with the event log, and it tells you not only what changes were made, but who made the changes. What this allows us to do is from the console to see the changes at the console as soon as they're occurring in AD. And then you have the ability, if it's not a change that you want to have happen or a mistake that's been made or something malicious, you have the ability to roll it back simply by checking a checkbox and hitting go. It captures all of the changes, even if the agents are disabled or if security logs are erased, because the directory service agent, just like a domain controller, if it's been offline, it comes back. When it does come back online, it says, what are all the changes that have happened since I last saw any changes? And they all flow back in. We have the ability to restore right down to the individual attribute or object or container to any point in time that you have decided to keep the data for, not just to a previous backup. So, for example, if you have a service account that is running a SQL Server cluster or a number of SQL Server clusters, then you can, and somehow something happens, the password changes on the service account. You can go back and check in the checkbox that says undo, and it'll reset the password back to the way it was, and also to the attributes that are associated with it, last logon timestamp, other password-related attributes, to where they are so that everything functions normally. It has role-based access control, so you can take your existing Active Directory groups. And for example, you can have your service desk, you can grant your service desk rights to reset passwords for users only in a particular OU only. Very, very granular to extend the capability and make it much easier for your IT staff and for your users. And it has a PowerShell module. So if you have existing IT applications, you can simply integrate DS Protector capabilities into your existing applications. This is an example of what the DS Protector console looks like. You can see the agent status, audit agent status, some notifications. You'll see that there's a up at the top, there's a security issues. We feature a security dashboard, which continuously scans your Active Directory to look for misconfiguration against best practices, to alert you of these configurations that will improve your security posture. It also has the ability that for you to, when you designate particularly critical operations, you can create audit notifications that if a change is made to, say, a privileged group, like domain admins, the membership of domain admins changes. Or, for example, if you see a computer object being created, it shouldn't have been there before. For example, there is an attack called DC Shadow. DC Shadow momentarily creates a domain controller just long enough to inject changes into Active Directory, and then it demotes it again. It does this programmatically. This does not show up in the event log, but DS Protector catches it because it sees the computer account being created in the configuration container, and you can set a flag for that to notify. 2020 has been good to us. We won a bunch of awards recently. The one that we're most proud of is the SC Magazine Best Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery Solution Award. So to wrap up here, from my takeaway, my suggestion, my call to action for you is for your crews to go back and look at your business continuity and disaster recovery plans from a cyber resiliency viewpoint. What happens, unlike a disaster, which is, by a traditional disaster, which is almost by definition geographically local to a data center or a region, cyber disasters are only by network. They pay no attention to geographical restrictions. Those are the sorts of things that you need to prepare against. And look at your AD plan for that situation and prepare to accommodate that situation and the different things that you can do nowadays to recover from it, like recovering to a cloud AD in a hurry. So that's what I have, Clark. If you have any more thoughts on it, I think we have one more poll, and then maybe we can get into some Q&A.
Yeah, just generally speaking, I'd reiterate to make this a business focus for people in the business, pay attention and participate in developing these plans. I think that's some pretty savvy advice just based on the importance of AD in your environment and what it does. One of the things that I really love as well is this can be reconstituted in a cloud environment, which means that it would save you money because you don't have to go out and buy a big expensive server to do keep your backup in. You can buy it as you need it, kind of as a service sort of thing. Just pay by the drink. I think that's another thing that for me is very attractive.
Thanks. So let's see. I think actually, I did close this out with a couple of quotes that I thought were particularly relevant. So Andy Powell, who is Maersk CISO, said, the most important lesson learned was that organizations must direct more IT resources into system recovery, especially offline backup capabilities. Trust me, it's the best thing to invest in because high-level nation-state cyber weapons will take out everything you have online. Every company should aspire to have AD up and running within 24 hours. 9 days is too long. You're welcome to take a fill out this poll, and I think Raquel, if you want to start hitting up some Q&A.
All right, yeah. So just a note to the audience, we did update a few of the resources, so if you do want to refresh your page, you'll be able to access those. And if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them now. So our first question is asking, is the ADFR server able to be air-gapped and sort of resynced weekly, or is this not recommended?
So there are a couple recommendations that we have on here, because obviously not every, you have to be, what is it? We call it a belt and suspenders, right? You have to be prepared for every eventuality. So our recommendations are this. We have the ADFR management server itself. So there is the ADFR management server configuration, and there's metadata associated with the backups, and then there are the backups themselves. So we always recommend, even though we stay decoupled from Active Directory, that you take these backups and you make an offline copy of these backups. In a highly scaled situation, we have what are called distribution point servers, which you can think of as storage locations, storage servers, geographically local to the domain controllers. So we recommend an offline backup for that. The management server has the ability to do regular exports of its configuration, and there's a facility on there that allows you to schedule the regular export of it. The export configuration, the metadata configuration, and a couple other bits and pieces should go into an offline location as well. And then it takes a matter of minutes to rehydrate an ADFR server if the original one has been corrupted or wiped out, or if you want to do you want to stand up AD in a disaster recovery environment or in a lab, you would take these bits from the management server, copy them over into your DR environment, and stand up your management server again, point it to the backups, and then restore your environment.
All right, wonderful. Another question here is asking, what is the DR process and time for recovering the management server?
It's sort of tied into what I was just talking about. So the process is you take the configuration and you take this information offline, and I think I just restored mine in about 15 minutes. The process then goes, you have the agent, in your disaster recovery environment, you install the agents on the servers that you have rebuilt, or a recommendation that we make is you include the agents, the domain controller agents on, if you have a standard gold build for domain controllers, you just include the agents on that. You stand up the management server in the disaster recovery environment, you point it to the IP addresses of the new servers that you wish to become domain controllers, and then you execute a restore.
Okay. We have a large enterprise with more than 100 DCs. What can ADFR handle?
So our largest environment has more than 500 domain controllers. We protect more than 500 domain controllers. As I sort of mentioned previously, for small environments like law offices and things that are local, you can back up just to the ADFR management server. For large environments, we can, and we work with companies, especially large companies, to design their ADFR architecture to meet their RTO objectives to get Active Directory back by putting a network of distribution points local to domain controllers that can back up and restore very quickly to these local DCs and scale so that no one location has backups from everything. We also compress these backups, and the average of it's about 3.5 to 1 backup. So if you had a 50 gigabyte DIT, we can compress down to about 18 gigs on the backup.
All right. Are there any session plan on bare metal recovery deeply?
There is not a session plan for bare metal recovery, but I wrote a blog post recently on the Semperis website, I believe it's on the Semperis website, about bare metal recovery and snapshots and how and their pitfalls compared to just backing up Active Directory itself. Essentially, in a nutshell, the challenge with a bare metal recovery is you're recovering all of the operating system. So if there's any malware resident on it, then you're going to recover that. You're restricted to that particular hardware it was backed up to. So if it was a physical machine, you can't recover to a virtual machine. You're restricted. There are a lot of restrictions as to what you can restore to. And in a situation like this, what you want is options and flexibility in what you can restore.
You mentioned that with ADFR, you can restore to different hardware or IP addresses. Do you have restrictions on what you can restore to?
Yes. The main restrictions that we are constrained to is that we restore to the same operating system version and the same disk layout. That's pretty much it. So if you're if you're preparing a disaster recovery scenario, and let's say you want to set up the ability to rapidly create VMs in Azure or in AWS to recover, you would want to build out virtual machine templates that matched the volume layouts, C for operating system, D for DIT, E for logs, whatever. You would want to build out to match that disk configuration. But beyond that, that's all we require.
All right, awesome. We have another question here. It's a bit long, so bear with me. I am working in a very narrow-minded company with CEOs and very difficult to get the message to them. What do you think? How can we understand with the top management, 65 plus, the security-first mindset is most important in today's IT, and it costs a lot. We are a big, old, traditional bank with more than 15K employees.
It's interesting. Mindsets are a hard thing to change. My tendency, of course, is to throw facts and logic at it, but this is not necessarily there. If it were just facts and logic, people would have accepted this long before this. Everybody would be trying to be cyber first. I think that ways of looking at it are competitiveness for a bank. There are regulatory areas. Nothing gets executive attentions like regulatory areas where they personally can get in trouble. So certainly from the business point of view, and we tend to, as technologists, we tend to think about technology. And as Clark has been emphasizing in this, you really need to look at it from a business point of view. Okay, so we know that the odds, you could probably come up with something that says the odds of us getting attacked by ransomware are 5 to 1, something to 1, I don't know. Come up with something. And then say, we know that in our current configuration, we can't recover in more than 10 days or 15 days or whatever you choose. What would that cost the bank? And will the bank even survive that? In other circumstances, I know CISOs have been replaced because they wouldn't look at these situations. But that's my recommendation is it's a bank, they look at money. What would it cost?
And use a standard annual rate of occurrence sort of approach to this. using along industry standards, how often you are attacked and what the cost of each attack is based on history, and then the cost to mitigate, right? So show that on a balanced scale so that the business owners can see, the leaders of that business can see very clearly from a business perspective, this makes sense for us to invest. It just makes too much sense, right? So stay away from the sky is falling. Just use the annual rate of occurrence and the cost of each occurrence and the cost to mitigate. Very simple.
All right, awesome. Someone is asking if ADFR can store backups locally on the domain controllers, and if so, how many?
Yes. So by default, the most recent backup will be stored on the domain controller itself. Now you can adjust this to store as many locally as you want to. If you look at the main use case scenario, the main scenarios that you come across, as I said before, where you either trust the operating system or you don't trust the operating system. If you trust the operating system, having 2 or 3 backups on your domain controllers is a great idea because that's the fastest way to bring it back, and you know it's sitting safely on another partition, on another volume somewhere. If you don't trust the operating system, then you can have the single backup on there and know that in this scenario where if you get attacked by ransomware or wiperware, there won't be anything that you're able to do with it. So we recommend 1 to 2 backups. If you have a small Active Directory database, a DIT, then there's no harm in having several copies on there because they don't take up much room.
All right, next question. Are snaps not useful in restoring an AD environment in the event of a ransomware attack?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite hear it.
Yes. Would you say that snaps are useful or not useful in restoring an AD event AD environment in the event of a ransomware attack?
Yes. So snapshots or checkpoints of a virtual machine. In that same blog post, I talk about checkpoints and their drawbacks. And essentially, well, there are a number of drawbacks to checkpoints, but one way to look at it, let me order this. So first off, to have a reliable checkpoint of Active Directory, because you have to understand, of course, that Active Directory is a distributed system that has updates traveling everywhere all the time. You would have to take a snapshot of every domain controller at the exact same instant to try to get an accurate view, an accurate checkpoint of AD. What experience has shown is that if you restore AD from a checkpoint or from multiple checkpoints, is that it's almost guaranteed that you introduce lingering objects into Active Directory that then are very difficult to clean up. A Microsoft Premier Field Engineer noted that cleaning up lingering objects is probably the #1 and the most labor-intensive action that you have to do in Active Directory maintenance. Another is that, and by the way, it's not beyond the possibility you can induce USN rollback. You still come back to the issues of hardware dependence and the fact that your snapshot, if you had malware on your domain controller, your snapshot will have malware on it also.
All right. Another question is asking, they think it seems like a program that they're already using from Varonis. How is your program different?
Well, there are many differences, but in terms of what I think you're asking, the single biggest difference is that ADFR only backs up Active Directory. It does not back up the operating system at all. So that if you are subject to a malware attack, all of the other products recover the whole server and therefore recover the malware that may be on the server. ADFR only recovers Active Directory, not the malware that might have been on the server.
All right, great. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you so much, Sean and Clark, for sharing your expertise with us. And also
Thank
thank
you.
you to the audience for attending today's webcast sponsored by Semperis and presented by Redmond Magazine. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.